What if the ocean wasn't the final frontier, but the final trap? What if humanity's thirst to touch the untouchable depths led to a moment so devastating it silenced 5 lives in a single breath? What if a vessel meant to honor the dead became their echo? This isn't fiction. This isn't mythology. This is the OceanGate disaster. A tragedy born not only from water pressure and engineering failure, but from ego, ambition, and warnings ignored.
And it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens. And it's Bluetooth, so I can hand it to anybody. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
I think Stockton was designing a mousetrap for billionaires.
And what you're about to hear may reveal more than any official documentary.
Because while the Trainwreck Netflix series promises a deep dive, it can't tell you everything.
Some truths remain off camera. Some theories remain unconfirmed. And some voices, whistleblowers, survivors, critics, don't make it to the final cut. But here, we'll follow every thread. From facts to failures. From ambition to implosion. From innovation to alleged cover-ups. This is more than a deep-sea tragedy. This is the anatomy of a disaster that might have been prevented. And in the end, you'll learn what the public was never meant to know. This is History 101. Let's begin.
In 2009, Stockton Rush, a Princeton-educated aerospace engineer with a deep fascination for uncharted territory, founded OceanGate Expeditions.
OceanGate would offer something few others could: access to the Titanic. But beneath the ambition, early cracks began to show. The company had little interest in traditional submersible regulations. In fact, Rush publicly criticized them. He once said, "At some point, safety just is pure waste."
You know, I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
He wasn't trying to make the safest sub. He was trying to make the most revolutionary.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate. Let's take a look at Titan.
But it wasn't until the development of Titan that Rush's true ambitions took form. The vessel was unlike any other, a 22-foot sub made of titanium and carbon fiber. The latter was especially concerning. Carbon fiber had never been used at such depths. It was lightweight, sure, but it was also brittle, prone to delamination and weakened over repeated cycles of pressure. When questioned, he argued that innovation always comes with risk. In reality, Titan was more of a prototype than a proven vessel, one with no formal certification by any major marine authority. And yet, it was being marketed to billionaires. David Lockridge, OceanGate's director of marine operations, reviewed safety data and was horrified. He alleged that proper testing had been bypassed. Rather than take his concerns seriously, OceanGate fired him. A lawsuit followed. OceanGate sued Lockridge for breach of contract. He countersued, citing wrongful termination and raising specific safety concerns that, in hindsight, read like prophecy. The case was settled. Lockridge wasn't alone. In the same year, over 36 deep-sea experts from the Marine Technology Society sent a formal letter to OceanGate urging them not to proceed with Titanic dives without proper certification. They warned that Titan's design violated long-standing engineering principles. Their plea was dismissed. Rush responded in interviews by doubling down on his philosophy. He claimed regulation was strangling innovation, that bureaucracy was the enemy of discovery. He said OceanGate's testing process was robust enough. OceanGate began limited dives in 2019, but the Titanic expeditions wouldn't begin until 2021. These missions were plagued by delays, cancellations, and strange incidents. On one occasion, Titan got lost during a dive, temporarily vanishing for several hours. On another, the vessel's propulsion system failed mid-descent. Passengers, including wealthy clients and Titanic researchers, began to voice quiet concerns. But these concerns rarely made headlines. OceanGate curated their public image carefully, posting promotional videos, featuring interviews with mission specialists, and promising exclusive footage of the Titanic like the world had never seen. Few asked what the passengers were truly getting into, or whether the vessel could survive repeated dives to such depths. Behind the curtain, engineers worried. Some had already walked away, but Stockton Rush kept pushing forward. In early June 2023, Titan was deployed again, this time with a high-profile group of passengers. Stockton Rush would pilot the mission himself. Accompanying him were 4 men: British businessman and adventurer Hamish Harding, Pakistani entrepreneur Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman, and Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet. The group was elite, educated, informed, but even they may not have known the true state of the vessel. According to one OceanGate technician, Titan had already shown signs of wear, but the dive proceeded. On June 18, 2023, Titan began its descent, one that would last only 1 hour and 45 minutes before all contact was lost. From that moment, the clock started ticking, or so the public thought. What happened next and what had already happened would trigger one of the most surreal media frenzies in modern history.
On the morning of June 18, 2023, the Titan launched from the deck of the Polar Prince. The seas were relatively calm. The dive began at approximately 8 a.m. local time. The plan was simple: descend nearly 4,000 meters to the Titanic, spend time observing the wreckage, and return within a few hours. But something went wrong. Roughly 1 hour and 45 minutes into the descent, Titan lost contact. Not just radio contact, which is expected at those depths, but all tracking, all communications, all signs of life. It was sudden, silent, and total. The Polar Prince team raised the alarm. But deep-sea rescues don't work like mountain searches. There's no GPS underwater, no sonar beacon from Titan, just a massive, black ocean and the haunting knowledge that if something had gone wrong at depth, it would already be over. At that time, the public was told the Titan might still be intact, that it might be stranded on the ocean floor with oxygen running out. But behind closed doors, the truth was already surfacing, or rather, sinking in.
What few people knew then, and what even some families were allegedly not told at the time, was that the US Navy had detected an acoustic anomaly just hours after the Titan vanished, a sound consistent with an implosion. This wasn't revealed until days later, but according to naval sources, a classified underwater system designed to detect enemy submarines had picked up the signature at the precise moment Titan lost contact. The implication was chilling. The vessel hadn't run out of air. It hadn't lost power. It had likely imploded almost immediately after losing contact. Still, a massive search effort was launched. Canadian aircraft, US Coast Guard ships, and French deep-sea robots scoured the Atlantic. For 4 days, the world watched in suspense. Media outlets ran hourly updates on the oxygen countdown. Experts speculated. Hope flickered. But some critics and family members would later ask why the implosion signal hadn't been disclosed earlier, why the search was prolonged despite internal knowledge that survival was highly unlikely. Allegations of political delay and public manipulation began to circulate. Officials denied a cover-up, but the damage was done. The truth had imploded long before the wreckage was found.
On June 22, 2023, 4 days after Titan's final descent, the U.S. Coast Guard confirmed the worst. A debris field had been discovered on the ocean floor, just 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. It contained the tail cone, the front end bell, and shattered remnants of the pressure hull. The pieces weren't scattered. They were compressed, imploded inward. There was no sign of fire, struggle, or malfunction. The evidence was clear. The sub hadn't malfunctioned. It had been crushed. Rear Admiral John Mauger, speaking at the press conference, stated that the remains were consistent with a catastrophic implosion. The announcement ended the rescue operation instantly. But it also raised new questions. If the Navy had detected the implosion days earlier, why had the public been led to believe a rescue was still possible? Why had officials allowed the media to turn the event into a ticking clock drama? Some believe the delay in disclosure was intentional, a strategic effort to avoid premature conclusions or panic. Others allege it was a media management move designed to control public narrative while governments coordinated recovery efforts. These claims remain unproven, but they highlight the murky space between national security and transparency.
To understand the horror of what happened to Titan, one must understand the forces of the deep. At a depth of nearly 3,800 meters, the pressure is around 5,500 pounds per square inch, equivalent to the weight of a full-grown elephant pressing down on every square inch of the vessel's surface. If a structural failure occurs, the collapse isn't gradual, it's instantaneous. In Titan's case, experts estimate the implosion occurred in less than 20 milliseconds. That's faster than the brain can process sight or sound. The air inside would have heated to thousands of degrees for a split second, flash vaporizing every object, every body, every breath. The passengers likely felt nothing. One moment they were descending toward history, the next they were part of it. Some find comfort in that the end came before fear could. Others find horror in the sheer violence of the moment. Either way, it marked one of the most extreme deaths ever documented in civilian exploration.
When the implosion was confirmed, public sentiment fractured. Many grieved, others mocked. The internet, already saturated with memes during the search, erupted with jokes, satire, and cruel speculation. Some called the passengers idiots. Others questioned the morality of paying to visit a mass grave. But beneath the noise, real pain emerged. Family members spoke publicly. Friends posted tributes. Entire communities from France to Pakistan mourned together. The Dawood family released a statement calling Shehzada and Suleiman each other's greatest source of strength. Hamish Harding's colleagues described him as fearless, bold, and deeply kind. The Titanic community held memorials for Paul-Henri Najolet, the man who had spent decades bringing history to the surface. But Stockton Rush's legacy became more complicated. To some, he was a pioneer, a man who pushed boundaries. To others, he was reckless, arrogant, and ultimately responsible. Lawsuits began to form, investigations were launched, and OceanGate, the company he built from a dream, vanished overnight.
When the search was called off and the implosion confirmed, the world moved on quickly. But for the families left behind, closure was much harder to find. The Dawood family retreated from the spotlight. In Pakistan, their loss shook the elite circles Shehzada moved with him. But the pain centered on Suleiman, a teenager full of life who had boarded the Titan for Father's Day. He became the symbol of what was truly lost, a life just beginning. A decision made not out of desire, but of love. Hamish Harding's family held a private memorial. Tributes poured in from colleagues, astronauts, aviators, and explorers who had known him as a man who never said no to a challenge. But his death raised a new question. At what point does bravery blur into risk for risk's sake? Paul-Henri Najolet's community, Titanic historians, naval engineers, French media, mourned a true expert. He had descended to the wreck over 30 times and knew the ship better than almost anyone alive. But in the end, he died beside it. And then there was Stockton Rush. His wife, Wendy, descended from Titanic victims. Her great-great-grandparents had died on the ship her husband now visited. In a cruel twist of fate, tragedy repeated itself. Two disasters, a century apart, and the same family line marked by both. The Rush family has spoken sparingly. Some still defend his mission, others remain silent. But for the victims of Titan, there are no more interviews, no more innovation, no more ocean. Only memory. What happened with Titan has sparked a global conversation about elite exploration. The commercialization of tragedy is not new. People climb Everest, visit Chernobyl, walk through Auschwitz, but Titan was different. This wasn't a public exhibit. It was a private voyage to the grave of 1,500 people. Passengers paid $250,000 to sit in the dark beside a ship that represents one of the worst civilian disasters in history. Is that reverence? Is it exploitation? And where do we draw the line between adventure and spectacle? Critics argue that Titan turned the Titanic into a tourist attraction, that the sanctity of the site was compromised by money. Supporters claim it was about education, bringing people closer to history. But in the end, 5 lives were lost, and no video or sonar image justifies that price. As with every major disaster, conspiracies followed. Some claimed the Titan was never real, that it was a hoax, a media stunt. Others alleged that the U.S. Navy covered up the implosion to manipulate news cycles. A few even suggested that certain passengers faked their deaths, a theory widely discredited but persistent on fringe forums. One of the more pervasive claims was that Stockton Rush ignored a critical last-minute warning, an internal alert or hull reading that was buried before the dive. There is no hard evidence of this, no logbook, entry, or whistleblower testimony to confirm it. But the idea remains online. Like all conspiracy theories, it feeds on gaps, and OceanGate's secrecy gave it plenty to feed on. To be clear, no proven evidence supports these theories, but their existence speaks volumes about public distrust, in corporations, in governments, and in narratives that feel too curated. In the wake of the disaster, governments began to act. Proposals were drafted to enforce stricter safety standards for deep-sea submersibles. The International Maritime Organization debated new clauses for exploratory tourism. Some called for a ban on private Titanic dives altogether. But enforcement is difficult. The ocean is vast, jurisdiction is murky, and as long as the wealthy seek to touch the unreachable, there will be companies willing to help, rules or no rules. OceanGate may be gone, but the idea behind it, that the deep is open for business, has not been buried. The Titan wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of how far we'll go to see what others can't, of how easily ambition turns to arrogance, of how one man's vision can become 5 families' grief. This wasn't just about engineering failure. It was about trust, about systems meant to protect people and the consequences when they don't, about the line between innovation and negligence, and how sometimes history repeats not by accident, but by design. The Titanic sunk in 1912 because warnings were ignored. Too fast, too proud, too certain of its own invincibility. In 2023, the Titan followed it, not in steel, but in spirit. And just like the iceberg before it, the truth was always beneath the surface. This is History 101.